My mama taught me how to land on my feet. I have this way of finding trouble. It's never far. Wherever I go, take one step after another. You gotta move like a rolling stone. Hey! You gotta move like a rolling stone. Oh yeah! Hey! You gotta move like a rolling stone. Oh yeah! Well, I woke up this morning with the devil knocking on my door. Well, he came without warning with a deal, you know, I just couldn't ignore. I do believe, my pretty lady, that it's time for me to move along. Take one step after another. You gotta move like a rolling stone. Hey! You gotta move like a rolling stone. Oh yeah! Hey! You gotta move like a rolling stone. Oh yeah! You gotta move like a rolling stone. Oh yeah! Hey! You gotta move like a rolling stone. Oh yeah! Hey! You gotta move like a rolling stone. Oh yeah! Hey! You gotta move like a rolling stone. Oh yeah!
Because this craziness, this sickness in this country now is shot through the whole society. You know, people in law enforcement have also succumbed to right-wing extremism and white nationalism. Again, what this points up is how pervasive and vast a problem this is, and we will be dealing with it for a long time.
We're
there, people. It is extremely awesome to have people here watching this movie with me. This is a video my buddy Charles made, and I'm super excited to watch it with you. Charles is a guy that I used to work on 3AM magazine with, and the two of us were editors there, and I've known him for, Jesus, a very, very, very long time now. And so he got into documentary filmmaking. He initially, I think his first film was, if you're into the EDM music world, there's a musician named Random Rab. He's friends with Random Rab, so he did a documentary about him. And then this was a real departure in that regard. It'll be obvious in the beginning where this particular concept came from, and it's a very powerful and very interesting movie, and has a lot of really cool stuff to say. So thank you for watching it with me. I'm excited for you to watch, Abby. All right, and with no further to do, let's I just burped audibly. All right.
Video. So if
That's
you want,
cool.
do you want to say something?
I am just
Drea,
relaxing.
are you ready?
Don't videotape.
Oh, come on. We're about to go parasailing.
Yeah, right?
What's your name?
Mike, Captain Mike.
Captain Mike
got-
is taking us parasailing. And this is Saraya. And I'm Lexi.
Nice to
It's
meet you.
me.
Lexi.
This is a rare video of my sister, Saraya. She was extremely camera shy. In July of 2013, she died at age 40 of a drug overdose and complications from severe alcoholism. No one who knew my family would have ever thought that Saraya would be the one to die young. That was a fate most of them reserved for me. I was the oldest of the children. I was the one who was supposed to be the most successful. Instead, my life took me in another direction. By the time I was 36, I had survived a childhood of physical and sexual abuse, 10 years of severe drug addiction, 2 overdoses, and 1 year in prison. When I left the addiction behind, I found myself imprisoned by the long-term consequences of trauma, which had me on an endless cycle of failed relationships and all-consuming causes and crusades. It was imperfect, but it kept me going. There was always time for things to change.
Well, what I'm gonna do is take you on a little journey today. And I'll let you determine for yourselves whether or not you feel it's relevant.
Then, Soraya died. And suddenly the time felt like it was running out.
Papa Doc Aduvaye and Captain Billy over here on this other boat.
Awesome.
They can sail
Okay.
on the boat.
Soraya, any last words before we go up? I
Dun,
want to see
dun,
some
dun,
sharks.
I didn't attend my sister's memorial service. 3 days after her death, I had to fly to London to speak before a group of doctors and researchers dealing with new ways to treat addiction and trauma. I had written a book about overcoming a crack addiction, in which I described how I first learned I had PTSD and how I found an unorthodox way to treat it, which landed me in prison. My sister wasn't the first person in my life to die unexpectedly. She wasn't even the first addict. She was just the closest to me. And in some ways, that makes it even worse, because you have a front row seat to their demise. I was faced with the choice between remaining silent and allowing her death to become just another statistic, or proclaiming the truth loudly as I saw it.
That's my sister. Her name's Soraya. 5 days ago, she committed suicide. So what's it gonna take so that we can stop this kind of thing from happening? Because this is one story of millions of people that cannot find the healing that they're looking for because we're not going out there and demanding that it's our right.
The applause was a momentary escape, but very soon it left me feeling hollow. It was applause from the choir. 700 people out of 7 billion who understood the complexities of emotional trauma. For this to mean anything, more people would have to understand.
Alright. Let go! Don't come. Don't come. All part of the show. All part of the tricks.
Questions about trauma is how global is it, how much of a big issue is it? And I think that in order to really address that question, we have to look at really evolution and the history of the planet, history of mammals, the history of mankind. For about 100 million years, mammals have been responding to stress and threat in the same way. And only in about the last 3, 4, 5,000 years has there been a species on the planet which has begun to malfunction in relation to stress and threat. And this is the human being. And the more advanced our societies become, the more advanced and complex the humans seem to become, the worse we get at it. So what's happening is that where a polar bear will go into a state of trauma because of an overwhelming threat and recover very quickly from that trauma if it survives the threat, human beings don't. Human beings go into trauma and then they don't recover. The nervous system doesn't reset. So as a result, they end up behaving very differently to all the other mammals on the planet. And when we look around at our planet, we look at how global an issue is this. Of course, there's lots of events that are happening that are traumatic, but I think more problematic than that is that the world we live in, the society we live in, is actually shaped by individuals who are behaving as if they haven't recovered yet from trauma in general. So we live in a world where we're the only species that destroys the planet. We're the only species that kills each other for no particularly advantageous reason. We're really the first malfunctioning mammal this planet has ever seen. Any mammal that's confronted by a threat will have a very, very deep, primal, early evolutionary response. The first one was probably a reptilian type freeze, and then you get fight, flight in early mammals, and then you get a kind of more of a social response in primates. They start to organize a hierarchy. So when we go into freeze, what happens is the nervous system just bungs up and something is stopped. And this is to avoid us burning out. It's like a sort of domestic switch where you just cut the power when there's too much current. And what's supposed to happen, and what we see in every other mammal on the planet, is that if the mammal survives that threat, what will happen is the nervous system will drop down a notch from, there I was at the red alert, I'll go back to yellow alert, run off that energy. You'll see mammals prancing, kicking, twitching, fighting, and then they come back to what doctors would call homeostasis, which is the place that they began from. Now what we see in humans' response to stress is that the traumatic injury happens and then the nervous system doesn't reset. So it's like coming off the treadmill, but your heart rate doesn't slow down. And next thing you know, you've been on the treadmill every single day of your childhood and your heart rate is just maxed out for good. The system is racing all the time. It's like taking a car and gluing the accelerator to the floor. Post-traumatic means that we've got to the highest level of responding to stress, so trauma has kicked in. And then it's a stress disorder, which means that we haven't recovered into a regulated nervous system. So we remain actually hovering around that top piece. What the body's trying to do is clear from the top part of that cycle down to where it came from. And as it tries to clear, it gets re-triggered back into it. It tries to clear, it gets re-triggered back into it. And that basically means that biologically we're revisiting, like a war veteran is revisiting the combat zone over and over and over again as the body tries to move on from it. But the core problem is not that there's something broken. The core problem is that something normal that happens in every mammal, has happened for hundreds of millions of years, is stuck and sort of halfway through its process.
When you think about trauma, what we're talking about when we refer to post-traumatic stress disorder is trauma that rises above what might happen to you in natural daily living. So not a minor fender bender, but we're talking about a significant car accident. We're talking about natural disasters. We're also talking about interpersonal violence. So abuse of children, rape, battery, assault. And then of course on the further extreme is combat. And what we're looking at is any type of event that causes the person to become interrupted in their daily function and not be able to recover back to whatever job life, whatever social life, whatever interpersonal functioning they had before the trauma occurred. And then what we look at in PTSD is 4 key areas of disruption. So the first thing we're looking for is, are they having re-experiencing symptoms? So both during the day, are they having difficulty where that memory of the event or events comes flashing back into their mind? But also, are they being woken up in the middle of the night with dreams of this event coming back to them? The second category we're looking for is this level of arousal, being on hyper alert, always looking for that next attack, that next injustice, that next threat to themselves and their safety or their safety of their loved ones. So being hyper alert in a car, thinking they're going to get hit by another car, feeling like when they're driving down the street in Chicago that they're actually driving down a road in Baghdad, that kind of thing. The newer area that actually just was added to the diagnostic manual, but something we've seen for years, is this cognitive and emotional disruption, where people start having thoughts of, I'm not safe, the world cannot be trusted, I'm worthless, I'm hopeless, I can't connect with other people, I can't trust myself to make good decisions, but I also cannot rely on others. And that's followed by this sense of emotional numbing, where you have this inability to feel this love or connection to many people, if anyone at all. But on top of that, this sense of irritability and often anger with people that they've never met or people that they used to have close relationships with. And all of this leads to the fourth area, which is avoidance. Because they're having these re-experiencing symptoms, because they're on hyper alert, because they have this emotional, numbing, what happens is people start losing their connectivity with the entire world. They start avoiding people, places, things that might trigger them or remind them suddenly of the event, or may lead to them feeling embarrassed if they do have a reminder. And what we see is people losing their entire social circle, losing their ability to go to work, and sometimes actually turning to substance use and other things in order to manage their daily symptoms.
Four times over the past century, a particular form of psychological trauma has surfaced into public consciousness. Each time, the investigation of that trauma coincided with a political movement. The first was hysteria, the archetypal disorder of women, which just so happened to emerge at the same time women were demanding the vote. The second was shell shock, or combat neurosis. The arc of its study begins in World War I and ends with the Vietnam War. It was the reaction to a strong peace movement and growing awareness of social and family dysfunction caused by war trauma. The third major trauma to come into full public awareness was sexual and domestic violence, which emerged as a result of the feminist and gay rights movements in the
AIDS
West.
is a test of who we are as a people.
The church will be teaching that homosexual activity is sinful until the end of time. That won't change.
This phase did the most to normalize trauma in the minds of the public. It made their resultant emotional disorders acceptable topics of discussion. The newest phase of major trauma is actually a complex and interconnected web related to severe weather and climate change, global war and terrorism, increasingly invasive and repressive governments, economic collapse, and resource depletion.
This planet is so far out of balance, it is and it will correct itself. The human race is expendable. The human race can go extinct. Rome thought its civilization could never collapse. The Mayans thought their civilization could never collapse. The Babylonians, the French Empire, the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, the Soviet Union, they all collapsed. Well, the human race is expendable. Life will go on.
I spent the next holiday with my mother as she tried to come to terms with Soraya's passing. When she wasn't in treatment, Soraya had spent the last few years of her life living with my mother in Florida. This footage is from 2010, from a trip we took to an animal rescue farm in the Everglades. It was my sister's favorite place.
Oh, look at this. She was here. She lives here. She died in '02. Bred and raised here.
My mother was the executive director of a foundation that ran a statewide network of rehab centers. She was deeply invested in Soraya's recovery. But in one of life's cruelest ironies, my parents and I were forced to acknowledge our limitations and that we couldn't save her, and that only she could save herself. That meant we had to stop enabling her. That meant finally cutting her off. The last night of her life, my sister begged my mother to let her come home again. For the first time, my mother said no. I backed my mother up and told Soraya she needed to find her own way, that there was nothing more we could do for her if she wasn't willing to help herself. Imagine the guilt that we hold.
Let me just say this right now. The drug wars are not a failed war. They're an incredibly successful war. It's doing exactly what it is intended to do, which is to breed fear. It is to antagonize class separation by antagonizing the race situation. It's about finding a victim, which is all of us, and the perpetrator, which is the scary drug users, usually black or brown, usually men, and it's about neutralizing that population. I digress. But it's about fear. It's about fear. I work with people on the street every day. They're in a continual state of trauma. The trauma of racism, the trauma of homelessness, the trauma of poverty, the trauma of war. Some of them are still dealing with it, but it's continual.
Anymore. What is it? It's Boom now. Oh, Boom. They combined with City Watch, so it's called Boom now.
We all have different needs that need to be met. We all have different stories, different backgrounds, but one thing in common, most of us are drug users. If not drug users, some are HIV positive and others have other illnesses.
Where do you want to put it? Oh, so we set this up. Or the snap.
In this world, there are some cities that have a wall, one group off from another group, with physical walls and physical barriers. America, Western Europe, we have invisible walls between communities, so that people from my community don't really know or see or understand the level of trauma that's going on in these communities.
You like that one? Yeah.
When you're with the people who got no money in this world, you get to do less stuff and you get to have less access to healing. That's just like the way that we appear to have set it up. We pay a price for it every day. You do and I do. It's almost like people's expected life plan is going to like go from inadequate housing to maybe no housing to maybe some kind of a home to a caseworker to a therapist, oh, now to jail. Now we got involved in drugs, drug treatment, and of course the whole drug scene then becomes its own huge trauma-making factory also. And that's the expected currency of life. You know, how do they feel safe? I don't know how they get to feel safe.
I was trying to tell him I wouldn't disrespect and bring no drugs in his car because he better good do it to me. I'm not gonna do it like that, you know what I'm saying? I shot up this morning, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, 10 years, man, 10 years I'm struggling with this heroin addiction and there's like no fucking escape, man. I've been to jail, I've been to psychiatric, you know, facilities, okay? I've done it all, you know what I'm saying? And nothing's working, man. The methadone program, okay, yeah, it keeps me out of jail, maybe, you know what I'm saying? But it ain't doing shit else for me. I'm still a slave to it, you know what I'm saying? I want to be able to go on vacation, you know what I'm saying? And my wife won't let me see my son until she sees a hair follicle sample that says I'm 6 months clean. You know what I'm saying? And I have a 3.5-year-old son. And I want to see my son. I want to see my son. You know what I'm saying? If I keep talking about that, I'm gonna cry, so I guess that.
I've known so many great healers and great teachers who've had huge flaws, big ones. You know, for me, I try to do my work as best I can. And I think what informs it is the pain that I've gone through, the suffering that I've gone through, my wife dying when she was pregnant, my father having a mental illness and being afraid in the house, not being able to read and being abused at school. I lived a life, and a lot of people have lived a life, you know, and sometimes if I look at the shit, you know, I can say that I've lived a hard life. The thing is, I go in and explore, and it's never fucking done.
You know what it's like to be suffering from a disease that's killing you? And when you suffer from cancer and it's killing you, all your family's around you, but when heroin's killing you slowly, and you dying, and all your family hates you, and you dying slow and alone, that shit hurts, man. That shit really fucking hurts.
I can go out and, you know, do an interview like this, or I can go and do a healing or conduct a group, you know, in East Harlem, or I could do an Iboga ceremony with somebody who walk them through, and I could be in deep, deep pain. And that's the way it is. Now, what I'm looking for is freedom.
Man, it's gorgeous out here, man. Just to get out the city for a little bit.
We're not going beyond that barricade, man.
Oh, man, yeah. All right. You know something? It's amazing the things you see, man, when you're sober up. No, did you catch that? I'll say it again. It's amazing the things you see when you're sober.
every time I go through this deep self-exploration, and I've had issues around food, around drugs, around sex. I just never touched gambling, you know? And I haven't had the drug issues like in the last 11 years where I've sort of gone through this healing journey, but the other shit is flashes up. And it's really about consumerism, right? It's about consuming more and more to find a place in yourself where you're okay.
My family arrived here first in 1620. My ancestors signed the Mayflower Compact. This is the seat of American democracy, one man, one vote. The rest of the family came over in 1645. Maryland, with a land grant from King of England through Lord Baltimore, and helped establish much of the region there. They were naughty, yes. It was fashionable in the day to have slaves. In fact, it was illegal not to have slaves. My great-grandmother's first cousin was Mary Lincoln. So on one side, I have the emancipators. On the other side, I have the enslavers. So a real American. And with that, there's a certain sense that you're raised as a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, which is that it is your duty to guide and direct everyone else's play. That at the end of the day, they're all visitors here. They're guests in a way. They came through Ellis Island. They did whatever they did, but you were here first by manifest destiny and invitation, special invitation. People understood back then, through the French model, noblesse oblige, that if you have too many pissed off, hungry, desperate people, they're going to get upset. And when they get upset, they're going to come and take your toys. They're going to come on your lawn and take a whiz on it. And worse. So you never let people get so bent out of shape. You always have safety valves. You have just enough public services so that the pressure cooker doesn't explode. You know, my father liked to drink. Not go to the pub and knock back a pint, but basically buy cases of vodka. He was a real alcoholic, like the real deal. Having grown up with this excessive father and a mother who, in some of her better days, was a cross between Cruella de Vil and Mommy Dearest.
No more hangers!
You know, it was difficult. It really was. At around the age of 14, I was sent off to boarding school in Switzerland. 4 years of Teutonic hell. My father had identified a school where former SS officers were living now in a neutral country. They were in their 80s at that time. You've seen these in the World War II movies, the guys dressed in white with the machine guns on the German side. There was, yeah, one of those fellas. Taught us how to ski. The house mother was Mussolini's former girlfriend Fräulein Ragazzini. And I knew, just as most people have a general sense of right, wrong, and to what degree. We all do. We may ignore it, we may hit the override button, but we have a general sense of right, wrong, and to what degree. And I knew this was fucked up. He liked to collect German war memorabilia, if you catch my drift. Schmeisser MP40 subautomatic machine guns, a massive swastika that covered the entire wall of his den, which, by the way, is illegal in a lot of countries, but not here. Still not here. It's just a collection. It's just a museum. It doesn't mean anything. Really. So he found from a movie set, I think it was the movie A Bridge Too Far, where they used real Panzer tanks. So he bought a Panzer tank and decided to take it out one day for a drive. Now, most cities have ordinances for vehicles where you can park them on the lawn, which lane. There isn't one for a Panzer tank. He took it as close as he could to what we called uptown, the village part, you know, roaring over people's lawns, tearing up flower beds. It's a tank. I mean, how do you drive a tank when you don't know how to drive a tank? You know, joysticks. And he got up behind this woman in a Mercedes and just swung the turret around right into her front windshield. They took away his tank. They had a problem towing it, or whether they used a local snowplow. I mean, it was tough. So he lost his tank, and you couldn't insure it because it was a German Panzer tank from World War II. So he had to write that off as a loss. He was very upset. He continued to drink, and he lived probably 5 years beyond what the physicians who attended him at the end had ever witnessed a human being live through with alcoholism. So he's in a wheelchair, snow white hair, dying of old age at 52. He was so massively deranged and so into his collections and guns and militia groups. My grandfather had died around this era. My grandfather was a civic leader and a good guy, and my grandfather died with a nice little fortune of bunches and bunches of millions of dollars, and donated 100% of it to charity. Didn't leave a penny for my father because my grandfather knew that my father would build these massive militia groups, so he was left with nothing. I got a call that he was in the hospital, and it was the last throes. And he'd been in the hospital for 3 weeks. When your liver is failing, all your organs are shutting down. And my stepmonster would go in there with little airplane bottles of vodka, sneak them in, and just pour them down his throat. And so she pretty much finished him off. He wanted them. He wanted them. It's not as though he didn't. But he died literally drunk.
I'm sorry. So sorry. Please accept my apology.
First, Steve Paulson talks with Kerry Sudler, a man who discovered his family once owned slaves. He took a tape recorder back to his hometown in Maryland and found much more than he bargained for.
I'm going to go out and do a little historical junket, a little family trip, going back to Sledmore, the plantation that my family had in 1713 when the house was built. Traditionally back then, the slave took the name of the master. So if you look through a phone book or Google, you're going to find out that really anybody who has your last name, especially if it's an unusual last name, they're all going to have come from there, especially in Baltimore and surrounding areas. So I ended up putting this entire audio voyage together and played it to a friend of mine with NPR, and it ended up running as a national piece, 20 minutes long, by the way.
You deliberately set out to apologize to some of the black descendants of your family slaves.
Yeah, I couldn't find any record, and I don't know of any instance where my family has ever officially or formally or informally apologized to any of these people. I was scared. I have to admit that. I didn't know what was going to happen.
We have another bit of tape, and I think this is a response of a black settler you met in a store near your old family plantation.
Your white skin gives you access to almost anything that you want. I'm followed in grocery stores and I'm followed in department stores still. Is it better? Yeah, it's better in my own lifetime. It's better. But it's not perfect. It hasn't improved. And white people still say, yeah, I have black friends, and they say that I'm not racist. But if you have to make that statement, then there must be some racism somewhere. I certainly am racist still. I still have to work past all of that stuff because there's jealousy, envy, and sometimes hate when I look at the things that other people have access to that I don't have.
We do follow our programming, and so much of our journey, I think, is to disrupt the programming that no longer serves us well.
In the United States, the federal government estimates that there are 80 million Americans that fall somewhere on the spectrum of severity with problematic substance use. 80 million Americans. Of those 80 million Americans, only 2 million of them each year go into specialty addiction treatment. A tiny fraction. Well, in order to really understand the significance of harm reduction and the difference between an abstinence-only approach and a harm reduction approach, we need to think of it in the context of our models for understanding addiction. The abstinence-based approach really emerges out of Jelinek's disease concept of addiction, which was developed in the early part of the 20th century. And the disease concept is a particular story, a particular narrative, or a particular paradigm for understanding addiction, which essentially says that it is a permanent, chronic, progressive disease that is only arrested by complete and total abstinence. When we look at some studies of outcomes of that traditional abstinence-based treatment system, we see virtually nobody achieving abstinence. There are some studies that show that at 8 weeks, there are 8% of the folks who are completing treatment are actually abstinent. What clinical experience shows us, what reality shows us, that people vary along a spectrum of severity of problematic substance use, a broad spectrum, and people often move up and down this spectrum. The data suggests that we've got this multi-billion-dollar addiction treatment industry, which is an abysmal failure. Trauma also seems to be highly correlated with addiction, so much so that I've begun to think about addiction as a trauma-related problem.
When I was at Bellevue, I'd say that the predominant situation was somebody who had been abused physically, emotionally, sexually in their childhood, and because of that, they had horrendous drug abuse addiction issues. They were alcoholics, they were crack addicts, they were junkies, If you ever read the work of Gabor Mate, he wrote this great book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. He talks about all of his patients had a history of trauma, childhood trauma.
Trauma that fundamentally is that loss of connection with ourselves, with our families, with the world. And then how we adapt to those losses is then what makes us behave in ways that become itself traumatic, because it furthers a loss of connection. So addiction is one adaptation to those emotional losses, but it creates further losses. And I would say that virtually all manner of chronic physical illness, mental illness, addiction, dysfunctional behaviors are adaptations to that disconnection, which is the core of trauma.
One of the primary ways of coping with trauma is dissociation, shutting down, tuning out. That is, to the feelings that are overwhelming, the feelings of terror, the feelings of rage, the feeling of violation, of despair. This has been described by some people as emotional numbing. So I can actually go on with my life. Trauma survivors are left with a sense of profound distrust in others, in intimate relationships. I was betrayed once. Am I likely to be betrayed again?
History, because that's a long history.
Stay with me. We got pulled over for a busted tail light in the back. And the police just, he's covered. They killed my boyfriend.
Hey, Bob. Put your hand behind your back. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
In April 2004, 4 plainclothes police in Chicago wanted to search my car, and I refused. This wasn't my first encounter with them, but it was the first time I was innocent of any crime. So, naively, I stood up for myself.
So that was the actual location. And so they ended up closing off the street right here, and there was the paddy wagon and the police cars here. And I was down on the ground right there.
They dragged me from the car and beat me in the street, and I found myself in jail.
It's only a block from my house, which is right past the tracks there. It was probably the most traumatic night of my life, to be perfectly honest. So much of it is seared into my memory with the adrenaline and the pain and all of that. But what I just remember is it was April 30th. It was the first warm day that we had like that whole spring. But that pavement was ice cold.
It was made worse by the fact that I later learned that the assault was not random. A group I was working with in Chicago had brought a federal civil rights case against the Chicago police. That night, the police found flyers in my car connecting me to that group. 1 month later, the police arrested the head of that group, and she died in their custody. To this day, we believe it was murder. It was in San Francisco that I was first introduced to the idea that MDMA could help treat PTSD.
Treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder really aren't that great. I mean, the antidepressants treat some of the symptoms, and the anti-anxiety medicines will treat some of the symptoms, and the sleeping pills will treat some of the symptoms, but there certainly isn't, one pill that's going to make all your PTSD symptoms go away. And, one of the reasons why I'm really invested in MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for post-traumatic stress disorder is that it works, and people don't need to take any medicines. They undergo this process of psychotherapy, and within the psychotherapy, they take MDMA, which is sort of like a catalyst that helps the therapy go deeper. But once they work their way through the protocol, which may be 16 therapy sessions and 2 or 3 of them are MDMA-assisted psychotherapy sessions, and once they work their way through the protocol, they're not meeting criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder anymore. They don't have their symptoms anymore. And they don't necessarily need to take antipsychotics or antidepressants or anti-anxiety medicines. In the long run, I think that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is sort of a more effective and more efficient way of treating post-traumatic stress disorder. And one of the things that we're doing right now is we're really trying to work with the Veterans Affairs and the Department of Defense and showing them this data and showing them that, look, there are other ways to treat post-traumatic stress disorder besides sort of standard psychiatric medicines, which don't necessarily work that well.
In those days, if you wanted to try this therapy, you had to get a hold of some MDMA and do it on your own. In other words, in order to have a shot at healing deep trauma, you had to break the law and put yourself at great risk. Not the most advisable therapy, but that's what I did. And without any kind of supervised treatment plan and a history of substance abuse and 2 prior felony convictions, I went a bit overboard.
I think you did a little too much LDS.
LDS?
It made me careless. My carelessness landed me in prison for 1 year when I was caught with MDMA back in Chicago by the same group of cops that had beat me that night. The full understanding of what it is like to be forcibly dislocated from society becomes the key struggle, and in the end, the key transformative experience of any prisoner's life. Jazz musicians talk about sustained intensity. Prison life is a frantic Coltrane riff that produces no sound and sucks the life right out of you. It's a negative-sum game for which there is no recuperative period. Forget whatever you have heard about prison being either rehabilitation or punishment. It's neither. It's an industry like any other. In this case, the widgets are poor people. Prison is a warehousing facility for the surplus population of American society, those without any hope of advancement. Imagine what that does to a society. when 20% of the population cannot find work. The last time that happened was during the Great Depression.
Five days ago, she committed suicide. She spent 4 years battling addiction and alcoholism. When she was at the end of her rope and I told her that plant medicine would help her in a way that all of this other stuff she had tried before wouldn't, she wouldn't take it because the people in AA said that that was using a drug and that it would make her sick. And the stigma attached to psychedelics and psychedelic medicine was so great that she didn't want to be associated with it. She didn't believe in it. And I know many of you may think it's tacky to do this, but it's not when you have written an entire book about your 12-year crack addiction and what you did to get out of it, and then you watch your own sister go down the same path when you know better, and you have the solution right there in your hands, and they're too afraid to take it from you because they think it's wrong. They think it's bad, and it might make them crazy if they take it. But they're already crazy and they don't see it.
Ayahuasca is a plant medicine that has been used by the indigenous people of South America for millennia to heal physical ailments and, they claim, to cleanse and purify the spirit. It was discovered by the West in 1851 when the legendary British botanist Richard Spruce explored the Rio Negro basin and was introduced to the vine by the Tokanoan Indians. Spruce gave the vine its scientific name, Banisteriopsis caapi. In different areas of South America, it is also known as yahe or huasca. For a while in the mid-20th century, chemists who isolated the active properties of the vine called their compound telepathine. Research showed it contained various harmala alkaloids, which are then boiled up in a brew, also called ayahuasca, with a multitude of other plants, one being the leafy Psychotria viridis, which contains the powerful hallucinogenic chemical dimethyltryptamine, also known as DMT.
10 years ago, ayahuasca was virtually unknown outside a small community of psychedelic enthusiasts. In the 10 years since I discovered it, it too has come up from underground and entered mainstream consciousness. Ibiza was the recent setting for the first international gathering of ayahuasca researchers, providers, and enthusiasts.
My name is Armando Loizaga Pasi. I'm a Mexican psychologist. I have been working in the field of addiction treatment for about 25 years. Got to know the ayahuasca medicine about 15 years ago through the Takiwasi project, a very innovative project that has incorporated traditional medicine and modern psychotherapy in an inpatient context for the treatment of addictions. I find that the ayahuasca medicine can be a very profound healing experience for patients who have some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder, so to speak, in diagnostic terms. Also people who have had deep losses benefit from the ayahuasca medicine. The ayahuasca seems to be able to awaken a biographical remembrance of the traumatic and the hurtful pain, loss, but also accompanied with other emotional functions that may not typically be there, like forgiveness, self-forgiveness, acceptance, are reported by the people to be very healing and oftentimes even more healing than regular psychotherapy.
All the science in the world is useless when trying to explain why ayahuasca or other plant medicines work. And frankly, by the time you get yourself into a position where you need it, you don't care about the science anymore. You just want relief.
We believe that it is an interesting alternative in addiction treatment. Western medical science ought to look at what traditional medicines have to offer. In this sense, intercultural medicine of the Amazon can have profound healing effects in people.
On the surface, it sounds insane. Bouts of vomiting and diarrhea interspersed within a harrowing psychedelic trip. No person even remotely concerned with the stability of their psyche would willingly engage in such madness. But desperation has been known to make strange bedfellows.
And ultimately, these substances, what they do is that they create more attention and more consciousness in the person. So they're not dulling agents like other recreational drugs. These medicinal plants, what they actually do is that they expand the awareness of the patient into their own character defects, blockages, what they need to change. So again, it's a combination of these factors that should give the family members at least the idea that this is a good medicine to try. Oftentimes, this is a recommended medicine for people who've undergone other treatments and have not been successful. So they have nothing to lose there.
Releasing pain and grief is the Sisyphean struggle of the trauma survivor. I can't explain exactly what happened. What I can describe was letting go of 35 years of pain and grief that I had buried deep inside me, crying harder than I had ever cried before, and feeling like if I wasn't being held in that ayahuasca state, the pain alone might have killed me.
Ultimately, there's always going to be an element of pain involved, of escapism. I think that's where these medicines are important because they put you in touch with your own truth, but in a way in which is not threatening. So you can look at your inadequacies, you can look at your pain. People, again, who have been abused sexually, for example, or violently abused in some kind of other traumatic way, they can relive the experience, but with another psycho-emotional context, like with a different perspective of analysis. And the medicine seems to bypass the painful mechanisms. People not suffer by looking at their trauma and reliving it, but actually can reprogram it, attach different emotions, more functional emotions, like acceptance, even gratitude.
I'm Kelsey Crane Gustafson, and I'm from Berkeley, California, where I still live. And I teach yoga and yoga retreats and workshops.
And exhale back. So inhaling, coming into yourself. Like sometimes we need to protect our heart and curl inwards.
I was raped for the first time when I was 15 years old and went into a 10-year cycle of sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, drug abuse, alcohol, a rowdy 10 years. And I came out the other side.
At first, my first several
3 or 4 ceremonies were pretty blissful. It was all light and love and like feeling really good. And I heard someone say once that you get these tasty fireworks at first to lure you in, and then they come and hit you. And that's definitely what happened with the ayahuasca. On my 5th ceremony, I was brought back to one of my rape experiences, and I was experiencing the rape from the perspective of my cervix. So in this ceremony, the lights are all out. You're completely in a dark room, everyone's sitting in a circle, and there's music playing. But I was in my own world, so I had a vision of this object coming towards me and just hitting me like. And I realized that that was the head of a penis, and that I was my cervix, and I was just witnessing it, because when it happened, I was in a blackout, and I don't have any actual memory of it. So the ayahuasca and the medicine helped me to realize that that did happen to me. Because I don't remember it, it can be hard sometimes to really take ownership of it and be like, yeah, that really happened. It's hard for me to believe sometimes.
Part of overcoming a trauma is to accept it as part of our, teaching, life teaching. It'll make us better people. Because if you stay stuck in the fact that this victimizing trauma happened to you, then you're always going to get stuck. It is only when you're able to transcend that and say, okay, this has also made me stronger. This has also put me closer, to myself, or to, there's a positive aspect that will come in recovery that is also revealed oftentimes by the medicine.
To become human requires a submission to a higher authority. It requires being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. As infants, we were completely free to be ourselves, with the fantasy that the world was at our command. Early on, we faced the harsh reality. We had to learn to sit still, shut up, speak right, dress right, stand up, stop making a mess, stop. The whole process of socialization is about inhibiting parts of ourselves and submitting to the requirements and the demands of our culture. And I think it sets up in each of us this fundamental sense of wanting to break out, to become free, to be ourselves. And then we run into dominator cultures that are based on authoritarian structures. The warlord, the king, God, the president, the police, the dictator, that are organized around hierarchical power relations that require individuals to be subjects of the state. So our societies now are organized on this authoritarian dominator principle, which don't support the flowering of individual freedom, even while that's something we all yearn for. I think that maybe this basic existential dilemma is one that, as a civilization, we're struggling to figure out how to resolve or free ourselves from, to move toward societies that may be based on co-equal power relations.
October 1947. 2 shiploads of Jewish refugees from Europe attempt to land in Palestine, only to be turned away and shipped to internment on Cyprus. In May of 1948, a new Jewish state, Israel, was born in a bath of blood.
Palestine. At British Army headquarters in the fashionable King David Hotel, the ever-present unrest suddenly exploded.
Casualties were very heavy.
The Holocaust led to the violent formation of the State of Israel during the War of Independence, in which millions of Palestinians were turned into stateless refugees. After forming statehood, Israel then evolved into a nuclear-armed nation with the 4th largest military on Earth. In the last 50 years, it has found itself engaged in 6 different wars. Now Israel maintains a brutal occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and has been labeled an apartheid state. It is the most politically charged issue on the planet at the moment. But if we step back from the politics for just a second and look at this from a human perspective, we see a very familiar pattern.
What happens is you flip from one side to the other. You're only one step away from becoming the persecutor.
עדיין לא מאוחר, אפשר מחר לעשות מעשה, להתחיל לאסוף את המסתננים. עופו מהמדינה שלי! לכו לסודאן! זה המדינה שלי פה! זה הבית שלי! אני רואה חיה מחוץ לבית שלי, יריקות, פסיכופטים, אנשים שרק מחפשים איך לרצוח אותי בעיניים שלהם, אבל אף אחד לא מאמין לנו. אנחנו גזענים. אנחנו גזענים כדי לרצות לשמור על החיים שלנו ועל השפיות שלנו. אז אני גאה בלהיות גזענית! אני גאה בלהיות גזענית!
It really makes you think, it takes you through this process. In the Middle East, it's brothers that are fighting, It's same father, different mother. You go abroad and you're not supposed to speak loud or wear the Star of David or things like this, you know? And as you go through security in Israel, it's more intense than abroad. Compassion is first of all to see where we are now, except that each side has its own baggage. It's a shitty reality. You see people are on the beach. It's the middle of summer. It's like the super touristic season of Tel Aviv, and suddenly you hear an alarm, and everybody's running like the tsunami is coming, and it's a horrible image, you know. And on the other hand, you see what is happening on the other side of the wall, and that's so shitty, you know. It is shitty, and this is it, you know. You get on with this, you know? So I think as Israelis, there is a tendency to grow tougher. What can you do? And also for the Arabs, this is why they are tough. There is violence there, no? But this is reality, a part of it. One shape of the diamond.
When you have people who are engaged in terrorism, if you talk to them, imagine that they're not just doing it because they like to hurt people, they're doing it because they believe it's a good idea. And they believe it's a good idea because the people that they're hurting are somehow dehumanized because they're from a different kind of race or culture. And this is necessary in order to create a better situation for everyone. But the everyone is a projection of the self. And so you end up with people who are brainwashed, just gradually and gradually, given the idea that the solution to my internal discomfort is to take some external action, which will then reset society out there, but that's a mirror for the biology in here. What's it like to live inside the organism of an Israeli? I remember growing up in London in the 70s, and there were quite a lot of bombings from the IRA. And so, I remember my father came home from Harrods, a famous department store, and he'd been in a shop which 2 hours later was blown up. What it made me and the people I would observe around me do and say about Irish people was really unpleasant. But what we were responding to was a really quite elevated mammalian response to threat. So we were feeling really, really unsafe in our normal domestic lives. So this is why terrorism is so terrifying. It gets to that part of us that we find most hard to cope with and to regulate, which is that if we're not safe in our own homes, in our own offices, in our own daily commutes, then we're never ever safe anywhere.
Be running 30mm. You got 4 individuals. Got a whole bunch of guys right there maneuvering. We'll be engaging. Roger, back here up at 30. Alright. Just give me a heads up where you're in from. Come back to the left. 202
Vi venter bare lige. Vi skal deroppe.
I was one of these lost kids that we have swirling around in Denmark because it's a very comfortable little nation we got going on here. And yeah, if you think differently, if you're sensitive or creative or not necessarily have the normal goals that other people have, then you kind of feel lost and alone. Christianity gathers a lot of those people here because they just know that there will be other kindred spirits. I remember it started with the oldest one, and I was really young there, so it's also the memory again can play tricks on you, and I guess especially being sexually molested for years, I couldn't remember anything from my childhood, which is really scary that you just have this black hole in your memory. Yeah, how did it happen? Well, we were many kids, you know, so we would all sleep together in different rooms, and then I would sleep in his bed, and he would, I think, actually he just was touching me a lot, and then he started teaching me to touch him. I think that was what was going on there. It was this game that we were playing, you know. And yeah, that just continued.
When did it stop? How old were you?
I said when I was 20, that was the last time when I said stop.
20?
20. Like, for example, you're a kid and you're being brought up with, it's okay to hit other people. And you're being brought up because your dad is hitting you, and your dad is hitting your mom too, and your mom, she's hitting your sister, and your school teacher is also hitting you. So you think that that's a natural reaction when you get angry. And the same, and as a kid, then that becomes what you do, that's your reaction. So for example, I was brought up to be my stepbrother's sex toy. Well, then that's the image I have on me until I learned that I'm not, that is something, a role that they have put me in. But I also accepted the role, apparently, who knows, you do, you're a kid, you're easy to mold, you know. You can teach, there's kid soldiers all over the world that thinks it's okay to kill, you know. Well, I thought it was okay to suck my brother's cock. Wow, what an image, you know. I just spent a lot of time alone, you know. Luckily, I grew up in the big forest, so I could, I was walking in the forest, getting invisible friends. Who is that kid walking around talking to herself? Because I couldn't express what was wrong because I didn't have the word for it, you know. I kept scaring people off. I didn't know how to act in school. I couldn't understand why people didn't want to befriend me. And I had these reactions, these habits for protecting myself emotionally. And that meant that every time I got in a situation where some kind of weird pressure from the society around me, I would react extremely strongly. I would just smash things out of the blue, but of course, because somebody totally violated everything that was sacred and in me. So, and I never had the chance to talk about it because you just don't talk about it. It's taboo, you know. And again, you're a kid. You don't have the words for it. You don't even know it. You just deep inside of you, you just know that it's so wrong. I was doing a youth revolution. It was the 60s, so people were breaking free of the bonds of capitalism and looking other places, and they saw this oasis in the middle of Copenhagen that was basically not being used for anything. The hippies and the anarchists and the drug addicts and all the other rascals of the 60s and the 70s, broke down the fence and occupied it, and they put an ad in the local newspaper saying, everybody come to Christiania, immigrate with line number 8. It was a bus going all the way through Copenhagen and ending out here. They made an agreement with the government that they could be a social experiment. A lot of smoking hash and liberating yourself in that sense. I think Christiania still have that sense of mental liberation, and this is definitely what Christiania does. We make a gentle revolution. Christiania for Denmark is definitely a pool of creativity and differentness. The only place in Denmark where I felt that there was room for me. I got stuck out here. There was apparently many things I could learn and is still learning, and also feel that I can express in this environment that I'm not necessarily able to do on the other side of the wall. We have a wall fencing around Christiania, and it is, yeah, very literally a wall from this little village we live in here and the rest of Copenhagen. It was just finally nice to have people around that I trusted so much that I could talk about it. And then I just talked about it nonstop for 3 years. I tried to go into these group therapies and sit with other people who have been going through the same. And it works to a certain degree. I needed something more radical. I basically decided to die, realizing that all I actually want to do is live. I needed to do that. I needed to go so far out that there was no other way back. It was like, okay, it's either or, and if you choose to fucking live, then go and live a good life.
But what stopped you from killing yourself?
I think it was this last thought in one's head that, but why am I so helpless, you know? I think I got really, really pissed at myself that I allowed somebody to be able to take me that far out, to transform me into a person that I was actually not. And I think it was that. It was just being so pissed off at another person. Revenge, maybe revenge. I got over that, but yeah.
Well, I mean, did you get over it in the sense that like you moved past it, or did you forgive the person?
I forgave me. I forgave me first of all, and I'm working on forgiving him. I'm working on that. And then he moved to Spain for some years. And then he came back to Denmark. And then not so long after that, he killed himself. First, I got really, really angry because he took away the possibility from me. He took that option away from me. That's what I felt in the moment, you know. I felt that I should have been getting that white card. I felt that he was a chicken, that he couldn't live up to what he had done in his life, you know. Deep inside of me, there was probably a very tiny little girl just jumping up and down of happiness, being like, wow, he's off the planet. Hallelujah. We're one asshole less, you know? It's okay to be weak. It's okay to fail. It's okay to go a different direction, you know. Everybody is going straight. Well, you really feel like going right, then go right. Because somewhere inside of you, you know that it's good for you. It's like a new door is opening. Knowing that I have to be conscious about balancing myself and my body and learning so much about how to deal with myself as a person. just to accept help and give help whenever I can. I feel good where I stand. Of course, you can always look back and say, I could have done better, I could probably have gone here faster. I needed it to be a slow, long, hard process.
This is the oldest concrete and steel structure in the world. It was completed in 1907. Can you imagine? Right there in that corner house, I've been living in there 48 years. Well, this year it'll be 49. We had a good, nice neighborhood. We had blacks, whites, or whatever, you know, everybody. Everybody was getting along good, but when the older people started passing away, things changed. But yep, this is what I was saying, guys. This is where I've been at for 50 years, right here. Trying to, you know, hold on to it a little bit. I got some little problems, you know, financially, but I believe I get there. You just got to keep pushing hard toward it.
I've seen a lot of things. What we do is we self-medicate the only way we can. Right in those trees right there, the tree line, you're gonna see a cutway in the fence. You can go under the fence. As soon as you get under the fence, you're gonna see a blue tire hanging. You're gonna see a doorway. Walk in that door, you'll see the gorilla. You know, a lot of people don't understand what PTSD is. When you wake up in the middle of the night and you cry and you shake, I can't sleep at night. I hear the voices, I hear the bullets, the rounds coming so close to me that it was like ding, 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 and your adrenaline is so high, you're like, people just can't describe it. They cannot describe what people who've been through combat has been through. I'm going to quote Clint Eastwood in one of his movies. When you kill a man, you take away everything he ever was or everything he'll ever be. And if you can live with that, you're okay. I can't. The people around here fear me. They think I'm crazy. I'm cool. Out here. Here and here, I try.
Hi, my name's Tim Burke. This is my studio gallery, Detroit Industrial Gallery, within the Heidelberg Project. Been here 12 years. In '86, I had some things going on, going through a divorce, losing a job, moving, just some devastation. So I hit a bottom, rock bottom. No, you don't. No, you don't. You just called me, so you know who I am. Come up out of that, start creating art. I didn't go to therapy. I moved in. I'm a little high on caffeine right now. So I created this robot creature. Post-traumatic stress. So there is no diagnosis for Tim Burke other than I need to keep going to some support groups to keep developing spiritually, all right? These are the first creatures that I built in the 90s, and they're on the dark side, if you will. And what I mean by the dark side, nighttime, subconscious. As a kid, I had this reoccurring nightmare of the Iron Man. I would feel a thump on my chest, and that was the Iron Man's foot hitting the stair, coming down the back stairs to kill everybody in the family. I made up rules so he couldn't kill me. Don't blink and don't breathe, he can't kill you. And he would be going like this, trying to get me to blink or breathe, and I would wake up not breathing because I was holding my breath. So,
That Negroes was out there in the streets. They was talking about we gonna march on Washington. Birmingham had exploded, and the Negroes in Birmingham, remember, they also exploded. Kennedy got on the television and said, this is a moral issue. That's when he said he's gonna put out a civil rights bill. And when he mentioned civil rights bill and the Southern crackers started talking about they were going to boycott it or filibuster it, then the Negroes started talking about what? We're going to march on Washington, march on the Senate, march on the White House, march on the Congress, and tie it up, bring it to a halt. Don't let the government proceed. They even said they were going to go out to the airport and lay down on the runway and don't let no airplanes land. I'm telling you what they said. That was revolution. That was revolution. That was the Black Revolution. It was the grassroots out there in the street.
I'm Yusef Bunchy Shakur, native Detroiter, former gang member, former prisoner. I've been home out of prison 13 years after doing 9 years since I've been home. I've graduated from college, written a couple of books.
I said, what up, though? See, that was my life, my journey. I was hurt. You see, hurt people hurt people. Can I get you to say it after me? Hurt people, hurt people, hurt people, hurt people. See, I had hurt in my heart because my neighborhood had abused me. I had hurt in my heart because after my mother would drink, she would abuse me. I had hurt in my heart because of the racism I faced, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I had hurt in my heart because my father had abandoned me. He was in prison. So to have my hurt, I hurt others. Gangbanging, slanging dope, fighting, destroying my own community.
You know, people always talk about Detroit, you think of the plants. But, you know, for us in the neighborhoods, you know, very few folks at that time was working in the plants. And I was a product of a teenage love affair. So by the time I came into the world, my mother and my father had split. My mother was 15, my father was 17. I grew up in violence. I grew up, you know, watching my mother fight dudes. I grew up, you know, watching violence occur socially. I grew up watching violence occur in my life economically, politically, you know, again, not just physically, but I don't know that. We don't frame violence like that, but it is happening. When I walked out of my house, I saw to the right of me guys gangbanging. To the left of me, I saw guys selling dope. So growing up, you know, so it was a mixture of different social dynamics that was taking place in my community, and I had front row seat to it. My mother ended up making me a ward of the state at the age of 15. And I'm in school one day, and the teacher, like, man, you doing good. Why don't you go to, what you think about going to college? And I not telling him what he wanted to hear. Yeah, I want to go to college. But when I went home that night, I thought about the question. It scared the fuck out of me, because I didn't know what college was.
What up, though? After I was born, my mother had shared with me, you know your grandmother, Minnie, wanted me to have an abortion. My mother was 15 years old. My grandmother, Minnie, had one request in giving my mother her blessing. Ava Joe, I want you to name that boy Hope, as in hope like hell he don't turn out like his daddy.
I knew firsthand gang life, the streets, and at 17, 18, I'm just tired. I don't want to go back in that life no more, but I don't know how to enter this new life, so I try to kill myself. After I get out the hospital, I'm back in the streets. When I first get to prison, it felt like dying. You know, I remember closing them that iron door. You know, I'm just feeling suffocated. I'm lonely, I'm homesick, I'm mad, I'm angry, trying to make sense of this shit. Sat down and I wrote my father. I got his address from my grandfather, and I wrote him. You know, at the time he didn't know if I was dead, in prison, you know, because we hadn't had any communication, we had no relationship. And he wrote me back, you know, he wrote me this long ass letter. It was funny because he like, P.S. You know, you misspelled knowledge, you misspelled religion, and it was a beautiful love letter, because even though a lot of things he said I didn't comprehend because my mind was so street, but I comprehended the love, the warmth, and the comfort that he wanted to provide for me and the protection. It was, I mean, you know, we didn't have a relationship, so at that juncture, it was ability to start anew, and starting anew was really out of him starting anew within himself. So he had already began the journey of redemption and transformation. Because if he had not done that, it would have been basically like, you know, you ain't my daddy. Who was you to tell me, try to boss up on me and you ain't been there, you know, so it would have been friction. But based upon his ability to look at himself and look at the failure that he had committed in my life, and so now it allowed me to allow what I needed in my life, which was a father, but not only just a father, a friend, a big brother, a comrade. So our relationship had took on so many different levels. And then, you know, every boy wants to be like their father. And I wasn't no different. It was just, you know, unfortunately, it was in prison. But it was fortunate enough that he was ready to give me the tools that I needed to go inside to rebuild myself. I'm grateful that, you know, out of that negative came a positive situation. Part of me had died for a new part of me to live, to be reborn. All right.
That's it.
Okay.
You gotta get my couple dollars.
Huh?
My couple dollars. Fuck the movie. I don't want the movie. Just give me a couple dollars.
Come on, man. You holding up. Come on, man. You complaining.
I got that dollar, son. You ain't gonna pay me nothing. You know you my cousin. You ain't gonna pay me. You know we.
You filming this? You filming this?
Give me a dollar, man.
No, can I take care of my business?
Yeah, no.
It's perfect B-roll, you know that, right? Well, in fact, since I got you here, why don't you tell me how was it when I was a little kid?
Oh,
yeah.
The real truth?
People out there to unlock the car.
All right, go talk to them. So go take that. I take care of you. I love you. Peace. I love you.
It's been nearly 4 years since Soraya's death. For most of that time, I would carry her ashes with me wherever I would go. 4 years of a dark and terrible journey in which I passed through all the stages of grief. There was shock, there was anger, there was denial, there was definitely bargaining, and finally there was acceptance. It was, at the same time, inexorably, a journey to truth and to the light. Now this is the part where I'm supposed to give you the uplifting message of hope. I'm supposed to tell you that everything's going to be okay. The experts are on the case. We got this. And soon you'll be back to normal. I suspect you already know that isn't the case. Pain and loss don't end. They're part of the human condition. We just happen to live in a culture that has forgotten how to grieve. In these same 4 years, I would also lose other beloved friends and family and mentors. After 2 years of crippling grief and depression following her daughter's death, my mother would have a series of strokes that left her weakened and unable to care for herself. Eventually, the cumulative effect of so many years of post-traumatic stress would take its toll on me. By 2016, I would suffer a series of nervous breakdowns. And yet, somehow, inexplicably, I survived, yet again. I'm still here. I'm older. I'm definitely grayer. I might be wiser. Perhaps even calmer.
All right, guys, can we have quiet on the set, please?
But I'm still here. Why did I survive? Why am I still here? I can't say. Why me and not my sister, or my friend, or my mentor? People ask me what it was that got me through. What did I do to heal? I tell them I tried everything. Twice. If I had to point to one thing that kept me going throughout, it was creativity. It was the ability to take the tragedy and give it beauty and meaning. This film series has been a reflection of my will to live and to heal, and to help those featured within it to heal as well. The clear message that I got after all of this time is that connection is healing, that we need to do this together. Approach the problem differently, with greater creativity and compassion and understanding, and a lot more patience. Because throughout dark times, life goes on. Couples fall in love and get married. Babies are born. And people like us get up every day and face life. Some days we do it better than others, but we face it. 'Cause here's the big secret, folks. Trauma never sleeps. In many ways, it's a lifelong partnership. And like any partnership, we can either make it work, or we can let it destroy us. Even our experts are divided on whether or not one can actually heal.
One can absolutely heal. Absolutely. Will you be the same? No. But you're not going to be the same after you go through college. You're not going to be the same after you get a marriage, have a child. You will always change. That's the human condition.
It's an illusion to imagine that people who've been traumatized are going to live the kind of life that someone who hasn't been, across the board. I'm saying that there are other uses you can put trauma to, helping others and understanding things, but damage is damage.
Maybe this is why people have trouble with the word healing, is that they know it doesn't really ever fully happen, or it's hard to completely define. I mean, I don't know that anyone ever completely heals from anything.
I don't know that there's a finite point, and that it's not a continual process that unfolds and deepens over the entire course of our lives.
In the beginning, I set out to heal myself, to learn how others heal, and most importantly, to figure out why some didn't make it. What I learned along the way is that healing, like truth, is a road, not a destination. Although some wounds heal, we will always bear their scars. And although we rarely see it at the time, our misfortunes often turn out to be our biggest long-term blessings. Trauma may mold us, but it's our resiliency that defines us. When I was finally able to let go, I scattered Soraya's ashes into both oceans and buried them in a cornfield in the Amazon. To the four elements, she did return. And from where I sit now, I feel like I've returned from some long and terrible limbo. Not quite a dream, not quite a nightmare, somewhere in between, where our demons roam and life begins and ends. So in early 2017, I went back to Peru and began a whole new chapter I like to call middle age. F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote, "So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past."
Actually been in the same meat space together, but I consider him family. We've talked many times. Like I said, we used to work together in this oh my mic volume way low. We used to work together in this online magazine, 3 AM magazine, and later he started up Newtopia magazine, and and we did stuff together there. I don't know if anyone's watching. According to the little eyeball thing on my chat, there's like me and my kid, I think. But I hope if anyone watched it, I hope you guys enjoyed it. The internet dropping was awesome. I will upload the entire video. Maybe I won't. I don't know. Like, you can watch the damn thing for free on YouTube. So maybe I'll just leave it at that.
Stretch to misinterpret that, didn't they?
Vosh is
no
playing on my...
Systemic racism means systemic racism.
What the hell is that? Systemic racism does mean...
Statistically significant.
There we go. Oh, that's a good life. Yeah. If anyone's watching and wants to say anything or whatever, that's cool. But otherwise, I think we're pretty much at the end here. I'll give you my 2 cents on the movie just because, you know, that's super invaluable. I'm important in the world. It's a heavy movie. I forgot about the part where we violated terms of service on like every platform possible. But it's an important thing to talk about, and I think the whole thing about exploring other avenues to heal trauma, looking at different ways to deal with addiction, and these are vital because right now we're failing. Let's be honest. This idea that addiction is a criminal thing and that people are terrible for being addicted to stuff. This idea that in some way we can heal it by just embracing God, Jesus, and if you ever look at another substance again, you're gonna, die. Like, our perspective on addiction is so genuinely messed, and I don't know what the answer is. The answer is research. The answer is understanding. We did Rat Park, and Rat Park is not conclusive science. There's been problems with replicating what the findings found, but it took a look. The Rat Park concept was they took a look at addiction. Our normal model of addiction is based on, my shoulder's just fucking ruined. It's been ruined for a couple of weeks now, and I'm just trying to make it not scream at me right now. Rat Park was basically, they took, the common model of addiction, which is you have a rat in a cage, and you have a dropper full of water, and you have a dropper full of cocaine and water. And it turns out, rats love cocaine. They love getting high, they get fucked up until they die. Someone came along and said, what is that really a solid view of addiction? And what they evaluated with their experiment, which they called Rat Park, was the idea that this rat was miserable. If you're a miserable rat, you're alone, you're isolated, you have a fucking wheel, and then you've got water or cocaine, what are you gonna fucking take? Of course you're gonna take the cocaine. End your pain. So he created Rat Park, which was an environment where there were a lot of rats, and there was a lot of things to do, and there was, activities and entertainment and whatever else, things that rats would like. And his rats, and of course the same deal with, droppers that had cocaine and droppers that didn't. And his rats, sometimes they would dabble in the cocaine because it was fun, but they weren't overdosing. And they certainly weren't junkies. They were just rats. And the point of this study is to question the idea that we understand addiction. From my personal experience, I can say, and my only addiction is cigarettes.
of which I am pathetic. I quit smoking, and I quit smoking for 8 years. And then I was going through a divorce. I was going through all kinds of difficult shit in my life. And started smoking again. I was out one night. I was on a date. The date did not go well. I walking home from that date, and this girl I knew was taking her garbage out, and she's an old friend, and I saw her, and I was like, hey, how you doing? And she's like, hey, come on in, we'll drink margaritas. And we're drinking, and I'm honestly, I'm putting on a smiling face, but I'm miserable. And she had cigarettes, and I was like, you know what, fuck it, give me a cigarette, who gives a shit? That wasn't a moment, that wasn't a moment of weakness, that was this huge, all-encompassing self-loathing, just popping off. And I've been smoking ever since. And it's because there's probably not enough reason for me not to. I know I can quit. I just don't. The start of COVID, I did some blood tests. I have these weird blue spots on my lips. And it was out of nowhere, and I was like, well, that's fucking weird. And they were really bright and really obvious. So I made an appointment with my doctor, and my doctor took a look at me, and he was like, it's not anything systemic. It's not like this isn't the kind of things like cancer or whatever. I don't know what it is. So we did some tests, and he's like, the only thing that came back is your cholesterol is a little bit high. Not like, holy fuck, dude, but a little bit high. You should quit smoking. And I was like, yeah, I should totally quit smoking. And he hooked me up with them quitty smoky pills, and I was like, I can do this. And then every morning I would wake up and I'd be like, I don't need a cigarette. But I don't fucking care. I really do think there's a link between how we're feeling and depression. The Rat Park study also came out of a thing that happened in American history that was unexpected. So the Vietnam War, everyone was a junkie. I'm kidding, of course. I'm being hyperbolic, but there was a huge problem with opiate use in the military in Vietnam. And American researchers were like, this is fucking dangerous. Like, when we end this war, we're going to flood our system with heroin addicts and opium addicts. Like, how are we going to fucking deal with this? And there was no good answer. They ended the war, people came back, and a good fucking percentage of them just stopped using. The thing that was making them use was the horrors and the depression of being in that situation, being in that war. And when that stimulus was removed, they didn't need the drugs anymore, and they just, okay, cool, I'm done. Our concept of addiction, they talked about that in the film. They talked about how addiction, our historical model has always been, it ends in death. And this situation for a huge number of people ended in nothing. Ended in just people being done. Fuck, my shoulder's killing me. Oh my God. And that doesn't hold up to our model. A lot of people like to say that the exception proves the rule. This isn't the exception proving the rule. That actually doesn't mean what you think it means. Proves in this case means tests. And this isn't the exception test the rule. This is a whole different thing. This is our model is wrong because a large percentage of people just broke it. So that's where Rat Park came from, and that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. And I don't know. I feel like we've got a lot of work to do, a lot of research to do. Charles, I know you're out there in the world and you're doing your thing, and I hope you're doing well. Charles has had some hard times lately. He had to have a hip replaced, I think. If I remember correctly, basically his hip bone went like septic for all intents and purposes, and that's probably not a good thing. So Charles had a bit of a rough go. We keep up, sort of light contact because we weren't going bowling. We were just buddies. But I love that movie. I hope that it helped him, and I hope that it helped anyone that watched it. Assuming anyone watched it. The link will be in the description. I will upload this when I'm done, probably tomorrow, because my internet was stupid and kept dropping on me, so there's pieces that are missing. So I don't know if anyone wants to watch it after the fact. Cool. But yeah, I guess I'm just babbling at this point, talking to myself. All right. Have a good night.